with this thing? Okay, wonderful. I'm sitting down. It's kind of weird to have a table in front of me. I feel like I'm like testifying in front of something. Hi, my name is Ploy. My pronouns are she and her, and my talk is It Starts with a Stitch, Intentional Design, Humans, and Storytelling in Government Projects. And in case you need more pictures of my face, this is me eating a giant dumpling from a local spot here in Denver called Soul Mandu. Tell them Ploy sent you. They have no idea who I am, but I go there a lot. So my pronouns are she and her, and I'm really excited to be here and speaking with y'all today. A little bit about my background. So in March of 2021, I joined the Colorado Digital Service. This group was founded in 2019 by Governor Polis, and it's positioned to bring modern software technology practices into hard state government issues in 2-year tours at the state. I'm currently on my second year of touring with the state, and it has been a ride. And I'm really excited to share with you guys a lot of what I've learned, and I hope you can carry it forward in the work that you guys do too. Over the course of my tour of service, I've been able to work on a lot of really powerful, hard problems here, including self-reporting for exposure notifications, paid family and medical leave, and currently I'm supporting the implementation of the Universal Preschool Program as a human-centered design specialist. Working with all of these statewide projects, I think really helped me finally answer to an inner voice that had, I think over the course of the last couple of years, become truly undeniable. I wanted to do something that makes an impact in the real world. And I craved to make an impact. I think even before joining this team, I really wanted to try to find opportunities to help my neighbors, my friends, my community. And I had always been that person to really overstretch myself, volunteering, trying to find places where I could really make the skill sets that I had been using in design really useful and impactful. But day to day, I worked on security software. And while security software is very important and everyone should always maintain the updates on their computers, it wasn't as fulfilling as what I was hoping it was going to be. And it wasn't making the impact that I really, really wanted to make for myself. So I think one of the things about making impact is why I got into user experience in the first place. User experience is the common thread that every single person delivering a service is responsible for. Don't let anyone lie to you and say they're not, right? It doesn't begin or end with a designer. Each decision made over the course of delivering a service can significantly impact that user experience. And while designers typically inherit issues that they're presented with, they also try to absorb decisions as they're made. And the role of the designer, really embedded on a team, is helping to translate these ideas into reality. And once upon a time, I was shopping at HomeGoods, and I saw a sign that I didn't buy, but whose phrasing really stuck with me. And it's beautiful things come together one stitch at a time. And there's no way to speed up the process. You can automate it, right? We can make machines to make us stitch faster, but we're going one stitch at a time. And this is where I'll get to part one of my talk today, which is intentional design. And I know when we're talking about designers and talking about design in general, it's easy to say, all design has intent, duh, right? But typically this intent in a private sector context is a mix of business needs, user needs, and development capacity, right? It's a juggling act between these three spheres of things, between what is possible and what is needed to deliver a service. But I think this intentionality really shifts when we enter the public space. As we move into government and public benefits, the inception of intent is completely different. And I would argue that my work as a designer in the government setting must be wholly, like intentional to a wholly different degree, ensuring that design is bringing together a larger picture to create a tapestry of literally what we're hoping for in the future, right? And intentional design in the government setting is making sure that you are outcome focused, you are seeking out the unseen, and then you're moving forward with the speed of trust. And when I talk about outcome focused, let's do some rudimentary civics here. When we move into a government project, I think there's just basic civics that any person needs to know. I am a first-generation American, got my citizenship in 2011. I remember taking my parents through this when they were studying to be citizens as well. First, there are 3 branches of the government. And the first is the legislative branch, where all laws are made by Congress. The second, the executive, where they are executing the laws across the land. And then finally, the judicial, in interpreting the law and applying it to individual cases. I think we're all pretty familiar with that. But let's reframe this, right, in the language of intent, which is the legislative branch determines intent. The executive branch executes intent. And the judicial ensures that intent functions as expected. And in order of the design of governments to be created as intended, they need to be focused on the outcome of those intents and seeing it through. And we can't talk about intent without talking about its polar opposite, the unintended. And we are no stranger to the unintended consequences of large decisions. I think this is fundamental reading if you're looking to enter the civic space here. It's Automating Inequality by Virginia Eubanks. It is a phenomenal book that really starts to detail a lot of the unintended consequences of big technological implementations in public benefits settings. Highly recommend. I love this particular quote right from, usually I can see these things. Let's see. I can't remember what it says per se, but I think one of the final pieces here in that quote is that he talks about the vendor selected, which is IBM, failing to meet the contract with the state. And I think that's a really unique perspective to have. I think the session before this was about contracts, ironically enough. And contracts is an exact way intent is manifested and intent is carried through. So one of the things that we do on our team, and I would never thought I'd be a part of contracting or procurement. I don't my eyes glaze over. My eyes are glazing over now thinking about it, but it's such a deep part of the work that we do because it helps us understand what are we committing to and what are we executing on. And I don't know about everyone here, but I live in Denver, right? And many of you might as well. The Front Range Urban Corridor is the largest density of people in Colorado, right? It slices 18 counties, grows 17% year over year. It's incredibly densely populated and quite frankly, fairly wealthy. But I work for the state of Colorado. That means all 4 corners across the eastern and western slope. And the only way that I can ensure that there is no one unintentionally left behind is if I take a deep inner look at what everyone we are serving, and not just the places with the most people or the places with the most money. So we need to be really critical, right? Really critical about ourselves and ask hard questions, because if we don't seek the unseen, then we'll never be able to successfully bring everyone along. And I want to tell you a little bit of a story. So in college, I worked, I loved running psych labs in college. So I worked at a lab that at the time was helping treat patients with acrophobia, which is the fear of heights. And we were using exposure therapy to help patients. And it was really cool. I am slightly afraid of heights myself, so maybe I got a little bit of benefit being in these sessions. And I really watched as we went through these individualized sessions with patients as they transformed. And they weren't alone. I watched it happen over and over again. And I think that's the real power of exposure therapy. And if you're not familiar with this, exposure therapy is a psychological treatment that is developed to help people confront their fear. And that's really hard, right? Confronting anything is really hard, but confronting your fears is like the worst, right? So the theory of change in this type of therapy is that people are fearful of stuff. And in general, when they are fearful, they tend to avoid that feared object or those feared situations. And it may feel good in the short term, but it can possibly make that fear even worse. So by gradually being exposed to what is feared, it is easy to lessen the overall reaction to that fear. The goal isn't fear elimination, right? It's okay to be afraid of stuff, but it's about fear management and developing fortitude. And being critical about yourself feels terrible. It can make you feel really defensive. But avoiding criticism, especially in the design space, right? Unsustainable. Everyone's got an opinion. Everyone's criticizing. But an antagonizing criticism, like making it the enemy, makes you this like magnet for narcissism. Don't do that. Criticism is good. It's not bad to be wrong, right? But it's bad to be wrong and unwilling to change. And this last piece here about intentional design is something that I wish I could claim credit for, but I absolutely can't. We heard this moving at the speed of trust from Erin Snow. So Erin Snow is the acting executive director at the Beck Center at Georgetown, formerly the head of the Canadian Digital Service that I like to lovingly call the other CDS. And he's one of the many civic tech leaders who comes and speaks with us about their experience while we're kind of doing this work on the ground. And for this lesson, the moving at the speed of trust, I really feel like I learned this the hard way. And I wish I didn't have to, but I don't think there's any other way to do it. I'm on a tour of service. So the Colorado Digital Service operates in 2-year tours of service. I'm on my 2nd year. I know I'm here for 2 years. And when I got here, I think I was really enthusiastic. I was ready to, I'm like, throw it at me. Don't put me on the bench, you know? I wanted to be able to contribute. And I wanted to be able to contribute as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. And I mean, 2 tech years, you can get a lot done. But 2 government tech years are very, very different, right? I was used to being able to learn and build and iterate and ship. And when you're part of like organizations that have this running really smoothly, you can feel like a flywheel, like you're creating a lot of momentum. But I think the biggest mistake I made, and the big learning here for the trust piece, is that I can't move past this speed. I can't move past the speed of comfort. I can't move past this because this is the heart of the thing that we are hoping to change. Practicing design while embedded in the civic tech sector is deeply about moving at the speed of trust and getting folks used to modern technology and modern technology practices. And I think it's really easy, especially for me, like you're coming in from a different sector. I came from a private sector job into a public sector job, and it was really easy to be condescending. We're not knights in shining armor. The princess isn't here, or in the next castle. There are no princesses. And I think I was likely so condescending and accidentally so, and I didn't know it then. Makes me feel like a jackass. That's a good thing. That means I can be less of a jackass moving forward. And if I'm being really honest, working in the government space, things don't move fast here. That's just a fact. There are too many wires and webs, both literal and metaphorical, that are all tangled together and stashed away in a box that you hope to never have to look again. This particular box of wires that I personally own I maybe have for like 8 years, and it's like crossed state lines. So that is a very literal, metaphorical experience that feels very similar to what I'm feeling here. And I think the mega realization that I came to is that the government is freaking terrified of technology. And it's okay, right? It's okay to be afraid of stuff. But that's the first thing we need to do, is we need to understand what is that fear and how can we address it. This makes me move on to part 2 of my talk today. which is humans. I love humans, or I like to say I hate them equally, so it's really, really fair. So when we move things from intent to implementation, the thing that's always fascinated me is how do you pass batons from one another, right? We frequently say on our team at CDS that we're running a relay race. I'm going to be here for 2 years. There'll be someone else who goes on, and how are we passing these things through? How carrying out intent is nothing without the people there to see it through, to pass the baton to. And sometimes to truly carry out and actualize intent, this might mean that we're passing batons between generations. This is a long, long race, y'all. And I think we live in a world that has this really richly collaborative experience. Even if someone is a lone wolf, they still need to get food, access to shelter, and community. Even these things don't manifest from nowhere, right? It comes from work that a person does. An apple is the outcome of a farmer, a bridge, a construction crew, and providing public services is no different. It's a rich and deeply interconnected and collaborative experience. And my favorite part is that we're not alone. I'm a part of the Colorado Digital Service, but we're part of a broader network of digital service teams happening not only at the state level, but at the federal level as well. You'll likely have heard of the federal teams much more broadly than us. We've got AT&F, the General Services Administration, the Presidential Innovation Fellows, and I slapped our logo up there because we belong. Okay, because technology is scary to the government, I think it's really easy to lose the thread of intent. The benefit of this broader digital service ecosystem is that we're embedding deeply in the civic space, and you can help to fight that fear that I said, right? Government is freaking terrified of technology. Coming here, being on this side of the table, is so different than coming in from a vendor space and being someone who's not deeply embedded. So I just want to call out, remember what I said earlier about exposure therapy? Hi, my name's Ploy. I'm Exposure, and I am here to give you therapy. And that is how I treat my time here with the Colorado Digital Service. Ooh, yeah. And most of the work that I do ends up being, how do I demystify technology to help people who are making decisions make better decisions, make human-centered decisions? You don't know what you don't know, you know? And a lot of the concepts, when we talk about modern software practices, like Agile, Scrum, all these things, they're alienating. And the thing that we need to understand is that I work in preschool. When you speak with children, one of the things that they recommend is get on their eye level, right? See them eye to eye. We're trying to do the same, meet people where they're at. And for me, it's a lot about positioning the fact that human-centered design isn't new, right? We have airplanes. Pilots click all of these buttons. Thank goodness there was someone who was helping design this. Human Factors is a long institution that started the foundation of human-centered design. Ergonomics, TurboTax, right? Human-centered design isn't new. And more importantly, human-centered design isn't new to the government. Providing public benefits is likely one of the biggest drivers for human-centered design. Most importantly, it's everywhere, right? The institutions that the groups that I've shared earlier, they're practicing it. We're doing it. We're doing the work. We've done it here. Steph's done it. She's right there. Okay. And honestly, the biggest eureka moment for me was that human-centered design is already being practiced in the government. There are groups that go out and speak with community members, and they get their feedback, and they're already kind of having this engagement at the levels of the users that we would otherwise hoping to connect to. So the lesson that I give to you to pass on to any UX designer looking to move into this space is that human-centered design is already being done. Find it. Because what you, fancy technologist coming from a fancy tech company, is filling a gap that doesn't exist yet, which is you're making this human feedback matter and threading it through into the technology. So you're making it through. You're pushing it through. And here's something else I want to share with you. So, I am a deeply, ruthlessly, unapologetically lazy person who loves frameworks. So frameworks help me because they let my lazy brain sleep in and not need to work that hard. So let me show you my framework for the anatomy of a government service. So all government services, no matter the level, should fundamentally be delivered to the members of the public in the same way. It's about how members of the public, either individuals or businesses, understand our services, qualify or request them, receive them or provide them if they're businesses, right? Modify or extend their usage, and get support for the systems and services that they're hoping to use at the state level. And underneath this, underneath what was being actually delivered, is the rich ecosystem of people that support all of these processes. And for me, designer, service designer, stepping into this role, I look at everyone here as my user. Everyone here is my partner, and everyone here is my collaborator. The state of Colorado is my team. But we also like to measure things, right? Humans like to understand when progress is made. And I think similar to technologies in the private sector, we want to ensure we have a way to measure success. And I'm just gonna also leave a mildly spicy pro tip. It's not NPS and will never be NPS, and I'll take my earrings off and we can go in the alleyway and we can discuss this further. One of the ways in which we want to really take a critical look at the way that we look at government services isn't will you recommend this to a friend or family member? No, the only thing you're gonna get from that is you're gonna really realize how ambivalent everyone is about everything. No, what you want is you want to take a critical look at administrative burdens and what we do to mitigate them. So in a study published last year to identify methods to access equity, one of the pieces in it that I really found, I read these studies and I'm like, how can I weaponize this for the work that I'm doing, right? So administrative burdens are onerous experiences that individuals and entities can encounter when trying to access a public benefit. These include things like time spent on applications, on paperwork, on traveling to in-person visits, on answering notices or phone calls to verify eligibility, navigating websites that sometimes are great and sometimes aren't, and then finding documentation, right? For God forbid you lose your social security card, right? It's just gonna take forever. Burdens that may seem minor when designing and implementing a system have substantial negative effects when they accumulate across that experience on individuals experiencing scarcity. So we wanna make sure that we're deeply not looking at just delight. We're looking at, are we actually delivering services that minimize and mitigate administrative burdens where and when we can? So from my point of view, right, the place where burden needs to be absorbed is in the design of the systems. If this doesn't come into play, the trickle of an unintended burden grows exponentially. The baton we're passing suddenly becomes larger and harder to pass on, and it makes me less likely to successfully carry through intent. Especially if we've made it so big that it feels impossible to carry out, right? It's about pulling out this box of wires and really, really looking at it. And some of them are so hard to untangle, and it's impossible to discern where one thing ends and another begins. Some may still be plugged in, and it's the one thing holding everything together. And some of them maybe just don't even connect to machines since the 90s. But we need to sort through this box, y'all. Or else we're never going to truly achieve our intent. And you can't get rid of burden, right? I'm not saying, oh my gosh, it's magically going away. No, burden exists, and it always goes somewhere. The amount of burden you experience if you face in an experience ultimately defines the quality of your personal experience. If the marketing messaging does not align with the actual delivered product, the client experiences poor brand quality. If the day-to-day work is not improved by a recently procured product, the client will experience a poor quality in value. And more importantly, at each step of these processes, right, the burden of helping our users fix their quality issues trickle down to the support team, driving up overall operational cost and frustration on all sides. Everybody's mad. And I feel like my favorite thing is to reach to support teams first and be like, what's upsetting you? Because that's how I know, right? They're always the front lines to know. When members of the public are overloaded with administrative burden in trying to access a government service, they will have failed to have met the intent of that service. And that's not on them. That's on us, because it sucks, and it sucks so much. Because doing the right thing sucks all of the time. It is so hard. And if we don't eat the burden now, it's gonna spill out somewhere else. I think designers are uniquely positioned to deal with emotions so well. I'm really proud to be a designer, and I love this space because I think a core part of the work that we do is taking and providing feedback. And it's about not having an ego about what you're making. And this leads to the last act of my soapbox. Storytelling, which is my favorite, clearly. So a little bit earlier, I mentioned that the task ahead in any designer working in this space is to make human feedback matter and thread it into technology. My challenge to you is to constantly ask, how do you make this feedback matter? How can you use this to understand real intent? And how can you use it to measure intent? And how can you use it to change and grow intent? The government needs more UX. I don't know if you've been to a government website. Could really use a couple more designers, right? If I'm being idealistic, right, I'd be like, okay, let's call the Fab Five, give me JVN and Karamo, but I don't think they'd bite. I love being a designer. I love being a designer, right? I didn't go to school for this, but this is what I've ended up doing. It's really cool. It helps me make things, talk to people, and be really, really thoughtful. And it's hard to be thoughtful, but it's an excellent challenge to face. So what I love to do, as I mentioned, in storytelling, and one of the fundamental design tools that I think is really, really helpful in this space is storyboarding. In college, I think across most of the years I was in there, I drew comic strips. So when I figured out storyboarding was the thing, I was like, I got this is my jam. So storyboarding is just a really great way to start to get an understanding of your cast of characters, your users. It helps us be better grounded in understanding what the future may feel like. I use storyboarding typically as a way to work through larger problems. I'll take a pass at what I'm understanding from conversations I'm hearing, get feedback, and iterate. These types of tangible artifacts are really helpful because they help us communicate with people who may be otherwise intimidated by technology in a different way. It lets me still talk about tech, still get what I need, but without any of the whiz-bang booms of screens or flows, right? And which might be a little bit too deep for some folks who are not familiar with this. And once we get to that understanding, once I have a storyboard, then I like to go a little bit deeper. We've got our broad strokes, right? I've got feedback in terms of how do you want this experience to feel overall. Then I can get into levels of finer details. We talk about information maybe that needs to be exchanged to make it meaningful. So we can start to look at the data. This is when I love speaking with data. And then we can dive a little deeper. Looking at things our users will actually touch, creating prototypes, first with static screens, and then moving on to higher and higher levels of fidelity, which means it moves, it works, it starts to feel like how we intended to go. And each iteration, I want to measure it, right? And I don't want to measure it against NPS, quite clearly. I want to measure it against administrative burden. This approach helps us to build trust, right? I've got the broad strokes. I'm bringing it down. And we can't move past the speed of trust. Take my lesson. I tried. It's not working. Always try to stay at the speed of trust. And by using these design tools, such as storytelling, storyboarding, prototyping, and testing against things like administrative burdens, you're helping to be really, really, really intentional. And it helps keep intent at the heart of your work. More importantly, you're better at articulating to all those people that you need to bring along. Storyboarding, honestly, great for executives. That keeps things high level enough that you can be really frank and talk about direction. And then wireframing, prototyping, those are really good when you want to get into the finer, more granular details with anyone who's implementing the designs that you're producing. These help to really manage what can be created and move burden along appropriately. For example, if I know that there's no good way in a product to solve a particular area, for in this case, let's use qualifying and requesting, I know then that I need to shift things in terms of things earlier on in the workflow to manage those expectations. And understanding these things and framing it in these ways help me to have better conversations with people who would otherwise not know how this is all so deeply interconnected. And I know that these levers aren't one-to-one, right? Like it's not like I push here, I pull here. But this framework, again, that I encourage you to take, break, and remake is a really good starting point of things to look for and how you can be prepared for fallout. And I'm going to tell you with a lot of honesty, right? This is working at the Colorado Digital Service, especially first public sector job after a myriad of years in the private sector. It's some of the hardest work I've had to do. It's just so much more. It's so much more than design work. It's change work. It's systems work, both technical and human. It's trust work, and it's vulnerability work. But it has honestly felt like the most important work that I have ever gotten to do or might ever get to do. And I'm so glad to have had the chance to do it. And I think my general perspective on storytelling is this. The most important stories are the ones we tell ourselves. If we don't believe that the government can work, it's not going to work. And if we don't believe that we can collectively band together to ensure our self-betterment, we are doomed. And with that positive note, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming today and this morning. I'm so glad to see your faces, be on this weird table by myself. And I'm so grateful that you're here, talked a lot, and you listened. I'm happy to take questions if folks have them. Otherwise, I have stickers, and come relieve me of them. Thank you.
I have a question. Hi. I am a government employee. I work for City and County of Denver. I am on an analytics team for Department of Transportation Infrastructure, which is great. We don't have a designer. We probably will never get the budget for a designer. And so I wish we did, but we don't. What advice or tips would you have for a team of, say, analysts or technical folks to incorporate some of this design work into their work?
I love that. So the question was, one, thank you for doing the work that you do first. And then the question is, how do we, for teams that are not able to have a dedicated designer, how do we bring some of these practices into work that we do? I think you said you were an analyst, and I would argue we can do this. You should be able to take design practices and thinking into effect no matter who you are and no matter where you are. So a lot about design thinking in general, the framework is like, how do we center around our users? And one of the things that I like to do, especially for folks who are not so experienced with design, is like, let's just write our assumptions and questions down. What do we think is happening? Because those are ways in which, especially if we come from a field that is more attuned to data, how can we understand this flow and understand where our assumptions are? More importantly, where can we understand where our assumptions are most impactful, so that we can start to use things that we may have in our toolkit to verify, validate, and experiment, right? I love mad scientist style design thinking, so that's the way I encourage you. Think about what you think is happening, find where you think the biggest gaps are, and test them ruthlessly. And then for me, the thing that I would also recommend is tell the story. You have started to find the story, and you can't just leave it there, right? You can't just end it there. So if you start the story, tell the story, and you will share, I think, in a lot of the spirit of what we all designers are trying to do. So yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So I'm newly
No, that's a great question. So the question was related to what is, if I can paraphrase, like the difference between it being embedded in the government side versus not, right?
Well, no, what you see from that side of the table.
Yeah.
I see these 5 things, and I wish that everyone who works with government could see this.
Okay, what are the 5 things that I see that I wish everyone could see? Lots of things. Okay, so I think one of the first is that technology delivery isn't just in the implementation. It's in how the ideas are first brought to the table and strategized against. And that's one of the biggest pieces of learnings that I've had from my experience here is that it doesn't start once a contract is signed. It starts when the problem is brought to the table. And for our team, that I think is really different than being on the opposite side is that we can follow through these inner processes to ensure that we're weaving things through in a really different way. I think the second piece here that I want to relay is that, like, oh my gosh, procurement. I don't even know, like, I still don't know what procurement is, or contracts. I am not a lawyer, but that is the biggest piece on this side is like how much power this piece of paper has between these two parties. And sometimes it's really easy to not think thoroughly about these things, but our team and the way that in which we work, we advocate for like how do we make sure that we're building in iterativeness, room for change, room for adaptation in the contracts we work with without external vendors. The third piece is that everyone except us is on a Dell, like manage expectations accordingly in terms of like software that you might want to share with other people. It's really hard because there's like so many like IT constraints and concerns about the way you share artifacts. I think when you work with someone, ask for how they like to be delivered things, because I might not have access to a Dropbox or like a certain piece of software in which you normally collaborate in, but it's one of the things, and I might not be able to get around it. So that's something that I would keep in mind. Let me think. I might just have 4 for you. Five, it's too many for my brain this morning. I think number 4 is that like, not a lot of states have digital services teams. Okay, digital service teams are quite new at the state level, long established at the federal level-ish, long for like digital service standards. If they have one, work with them. We are trying to help you, especially because I think one of the things that is really important is we're bringing in a perspective that is non-traditional in the government setting, and we're working with, like, especially when I talk with external vendors or external consultants, people who know and speak that language. So we can help translate for you. We can help connect those dots because we can see how the inner workings are behind the curtain, under the table. Oh, there's not much of a curtain here. Just in general, you know, so it's really like find and build those partnerships, and I think those are the most fulfilling things, because I think it's really easy to like make it like adversarial in terms of like, oh my gosh, like I spoke with my friend and she works for a vendor, and she was like, oh, when we get government clients, we just already know that they don't know what they need. And I'm like, oh honey, I'm here and I'm gonna tell you that we know what we want now. And that's what I really want to make sure, like, we're getting a really strong collaboration, communication, so that we're not fighting with each other, we're not thinking lowly of anybody, but we're working together to create a net positive experience to the public.
I just want to say that your session was already incredibly impressive, but the fact that you just pulled those out and spoke that eloquently about them.
Oh,
I just wanted to
I'm just like blacked out right now. I'm not going to. Yes, go ahead.
A quick question. So I'm not in government. I'm doing an NFT project. I
Oh.
activities into NFTs. But I'm from the storytelling side. On your website, do you recommend using a video? What have you found to be the most effective way to kind of convey your story?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I obviously love comics, but but not everyone is in that way. I think before making any medium, know what you're gonna say. So for me, it always starts with always start with pen on paper, right? What are you trying to say? And then think about your audience. when you talk about videos, are you making a video because there's only a finite time to consume that information, right? Is that the reason you want to go in that direction? Think about who you're trying to address. If I want someone to soak in an information, then I know I can go more long form. I could help with writing a white paper or something like that, right? But if I want something bite-sized and I want something like something really quickly done, then maybe a video is the right form. But the thing that I would always draw back to is like, what are the, like, get a piece of paper out, double space, college ruled, I don't know, and write your story, and then start from there. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. I assume these are all my questions. I'm here if anyone wants to chat. My teammates are here. I've got stickers. Please come get stickers. And it was so lovely seeing your faces and everything. Okay, bye.